Tonight, our theme is bridging the gap, how the workplace differs from college life. So, by way of introductions, I'm going to invite each of our panelists to tell us a few things. Tell us your name. Tell us how many years it's been since you graduated. All of you are far younger than me, so none of you have anything to be ashamed about. Tell us what your major or majors were. I feel like you need to take notes. Okay, so name, how many years since graduation, your major or majors, and then I want to know your first job out of school and your current job. Okay. So, Kori, you are first on my screen. You're up first. You ready?
Let's do it.
All right.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy and excited to be here this evening. So thank you all for having me back. I'm Corey Hill. I graduated class of 2013. So I graduated almost 12 years ago. During my time at Maryland, I was an accounting and management information systems major in the Smith Business School. And so my first job out of college was as an auditor at EY Ernst& Young. And now my current job is as a consultant at McKinsey and Company. So happy to be here.
Great. Thank you, Kori. And you're coming to us relatively local. You're just around the corner.
Yes,
Yeah,
I am in the DMV area.
that's right.
So glad to be back.
All right, Dennis, you're up next. Major, how many years since graduation? First job, current job.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. So my name's Dennis. I graduated 10 years ago. Um, and what was my major? I was a journalism major at Maryland. My first job was at a TV station in Evansville, Indiana. I don't know if anyone's heard of Evansville. I had not when I moved out there. And somehow ended up becoming a lawyer. So I'm a lawyer now at a law firm in New York called Gibson Dunn.
Great. Thank you. And Kiara, both Kiara and Dennis, am I right? Are coming to us from New York, yes?
Yes,
Okay. All right, Kiara, you're up next.
hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Kiara Manosalvas. I'm a licensed psychologist. I live in New York. My practice is based in Brooklyn, well, I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But my major in psychology, or my major at Maryland was psychology. I graduated in 2015, so I was in Dennis's cohort. Although I don't think we ever, your name sounds familiar, but I don't think we've ever met.
I was going to
But
say, I think we may have lived in the same building because I've definitely seen your name, but
yeah,
we can discuss
yeah.
later.
Yeah, we'll discuss later. Yeah, I was in Hagerstown. And yeah, so and then uh my first job was technically last year because I've been in school this entire time. But I did take a gap year in between my master's and my PhD. I graduated in 2015. My first job was in 2018, and I worked as a research coordinator to get more competitive for PhD applications in psychology. And then my current job is I am a professor at Teachers College at Columbia, and I coordinate the bilingual Latinx mental health concentration.
Great. So already the synapses should be firing in amongst our students. So start thinking of questions, folks, because we're going to turn it over to you here in not too long. Um, Let me start with a question. So again, we're thinking about this transition from university to the workplace, and I guess my first question is about an experience that each of you might look back to at UMD that in some way or others pointed you in the direction of your current work, of the current work that you're doing. Maybe not necessarily the first gig in Evansville out of school, but the current work. And by experience, I mean it could be anything, right? It could be a class, it could be a mentor, it could be an internship, a leadership role, meaningful, friendship, or a roommate, the lack of air conditioning in Hagerstown. What was it that you look back and you say, the seeds were sown at Maryland in this space or in this context? And sorry, let's see. We started with Kori last time, so Dennis, let's start with you this time.
Yeah, sure. Well, my first question is, does Hagerstown still have still not have AC?
Still doesn't have AC,
Wow.
although as Kori knows, because she was back on campus recently, we are in different residence halls now. So you got to get back to campus
Okay.
and see the glorious new residence halls that many of these students who are with us now would have lived in.
Wow. Okay. Well, I hope you have AC.
We
Uh,
do now, yes,
good,
in
good.
those, right?
Good. Yeah, I think for me, I guess a little bit about my career. When I was at Maryland, I fully was committed to journalism. That's what I wanted to do. And I had a lot of obviously mentors in the journalism school that pushed me in that direction and really helped me realize, what do I want to do in journalism? Do I want to do newspaper, online reporting? Do I want to do TV? And, had a lot of really influential professors kind of direct me towards TV. And for me, law school was never something that I wanted to do. I thought it was kind of boring. I thought it was a lot of work, a lot of school. I wasn't sure I wanted to do that. But in the journalism school, we were required to take a media law class. And I remember the professor who taught it was, I think she retired a few years ago, but her name was Sandy Beniski. And she was a longtime reporter with the Baltimore Sun, but also went to law school, got a law degree, took the bar, and decided that she didn't want to do that. And I remember she talked to me after class one day and said, "You should think about becoming a lawyer." And I was like, that's crazy. I'm not doing that. Um, but, fast forward a few years, and when I started thinking about whether or not, you know, I should make a career change and potentially go to law school, she was one of the first people I called. And, I hadn't talked to her in 7 years at that point. And, kind of out of the blue on Twitter, DM'd her and said, "Hey, don't know if you remember me, but I have some questions." And I
Yeah.
think that conversation really pushed me to going to law school because she told me, it's not for everyone, but you'll know really quickly once you start if it's not for you. And if you don't like it, cut your losses after one semester and, get, save that save that tuition money and you'll always have a job back in journalism.
Yeah.
And so I think having those connections, built up 7, 8 years ago that I was able to carry on really did help me make that decision, even though it wasn't something I had thought about at that time.
No, I appreciate that story too, because it wasn't just something that you weren't thinking about. It was something that you kind of it was advice that you actively dismissed in the moment. But it's amazing how some of those things kind of linger with you, right? Moving forward. Kiara, how about you? Is there something that you look back to at Maryland that you think that, that explains in some way or other how you found your way to what you're doing now at Columbia?
Yeah, I think I so I majored in psychology right away. I kind of went in already declared, and I had always enjoyed psychology as a whole, but it wasn't until I believe my I think it was senior year where we take that helping skills class where we're actually learning counseling psychology. And it was in that class that I realized that like if you think about the American Psychological Association, there are so many different kinds of psychology. And as a psychology major, I could have pursued like one out of 100 different kinds of psychology, right? IO, clinical counseling, um, consulting psychology, right? There's all different kinds of branches. And I think it was Dr. Salahuddin, who I think is still there. I remember
Yeah,
she taught one of
yeah,
the classes.
yeah.
And I remember building a really strong relationship with her and being one of her TAs and just realizing that this was the kind of psychology I wanted to do. I wanted to be a therapist. I'm a first generation college student, so I didn't even really know what a PhD was. Like it wasn't even on the radar. All I knew is that it's hard to get well, I don't know how true this is, and hopefully this isn't discouraging, but I had sort of had this idea that it's hard to get a job in psychology without a master's.
Mhm.
Um, and so I just knew I had to get a master's. I didn't really know in what until my senior year. And it was then that I decided to do a mental health counseling degree at Boston College. I did their master's program. But I think it really started with realizing that I loved therapy. I had also done the help center at UMD, which was a big part of all of that as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, that kind of informed my counseling direction.
That's great. I want to put a pin in the decision, the grad school decisions. I mean, so
Mhm,
far, you and Dennis both made those decisions to sort of pursue further education. And I see there's already a question that a student's raised about that kind of decision process. So I want to kind of circle back to that and also register the theme that's emerging here. Both of these moments that you point to involved a faculty member in a class, in a classroom
mhm,
context that
mhm.
really sort of was formative. So, Kori, are you gonna double down on the theme in answering this question, or are you gonna sort of show us a new path?
I can give a slightly different perspective.
Okay.
Um, when I came to Maryland, I was not 100% sure what I wanted to do. I started off as a journalism and an Arabic major because I thought I was going to be in the Middle East, covering stories there. And it wasn't until I actually attended an alumni event through another program where I got exposed to the careers in business. Because I mean, similar to Kiara, I was a first generation college student, and so I had no idea what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to be successful. And that's when I learned a bit about accounting and economics and like the opportunities in that space. And so, um, connecting with that alumni, she became a mentor to me and like kind of guided me in that path to think about like, hey, if you want to do this, then you need to take these prerequisite courses and you should think about becoming a CPA and all those things that I never even had really thought about. So really was grateful for that experience. And she also was a big role model and inspired me to get my MBA because I saw her do it. I saw her become a CPA. I saw her become an MBA, and I was like, oh, well, maybe I should do that too. But yeah, I think through that interaction, it pushed me to get involved in clubs on campus. And I was able to get my first internship with EY through like NABA, the Association of Black Accountants, and like having mentors and people who kind of guided me and gave me additional advice in that space. So, yeah, I think having like just those like student alumni perspectives and guidance and real world experience gave me like insight into what I wanted to do into my first job coming out. Now I completely don't do accounting anymore, but it was my first step and it was a big, role in my career. So
So let's talk about that grad school decision. The question that our first student raises is the following. They say, how do you decide if getting a master's or another degree is worth it? And at what point do you commit to it? So let me see if I can do this. Kori, you went and got your MBA at Cornell.
hmm hmm
Kiara, you headed to Boston College first for a master's and then to Columbia for a PhD. And
Mhm.
Dennis found his way to UVA after the journalism phase for law school. So you all went to different kinds of graduate schools. But how would you answer this question about the decision about the decision process that led to the conclusion that getting a graduate degree was worth it. And let's see, Kiara, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. I think it's really dependent on the field. So I'll speak solely for psychology just because I think it's just very dependent on the discipline.
Mhm.
For psychology, so I had to do my master's because I wanted to be a therapist. Like I had realized basically my senior year that I wanted to be a therapist. And so I needed a master's for that. Really you have two options when it comes to that point is you can be a mental health counselor, like a licensed mental health counselor or a social worker or a life coach, but I don't recommend that route. So you could go down one of those two routes in terms of just like degree attainment. I hadn't even known about the social work route. Like I didn't realize that social work can also be therapists. So I ended up pursuing mental health counseling. And I think it was in my master's program. I just made a lot of friends. Like I think a lot of like the themes in my life are just like the importance of community. And I don't love the word networking because it sounds so transactional, but like I think that's one of the things that I liked about Maryland is that it was the honors college, but I felt like everyone was really just supporting one another and making sure that everyone was taken care of. And like, I had a rough freshman year. my first semester, just like I had some stuff going on in the background. And I was telling them right before this call that I had a trip right after college with my best friends from my freshman year of H6, Hagerstown. And I'm now going back on a trip with them and we're reuniting for our 10-year like anniversary. And so I think like both in my friendships and also in my professional life and deciding to go after grad school and after a PhD, uh, came down to other people basically pointing out how much I didn't believe in myself and how much I struggled to like believe I could do a PhD. I kind of kept leaning into my imposter syndrome and telling myself, one more year, let me just keep, more school or more training or whatever. And yeah, it was just friends and mentors that I made in my master's program that really encouraged me um, to try and see what would happen. And so I would say that would be my trajectory
Yeah.
for that.
No, that's great. And clearly mentorship is a theme here. And so maybe Dennis, as I invite you to maybe talk a little bit about that decision to head to law school, um, reflect if you can on the how those mentor how you find those mentor relationships. I mean, Kiara, I take the point that networking sounds super transactional. It sounds very kind of instrumental, and at the same time, finding those relationships, as you say rightly, can be the difference between significant life decisions, right? So
Yeah.
Dennis, talk a little bit about your path to UVA for law.
Yeah. So back when I think all three of us went to school, UVA was one of our big rivals in the ACC. So I really struggled, making, making that decision. Um, for me, I think it was, well, to answer the question about whether or not a master's or another degree is worth it, I think you have to, have that conversation with yourself about what you want to do with it. If you want to be a lawyer, you have to go to law school. If you want to be a doctor, you probably have to go to medical school. You know, but there are other things that you might not need a master's in. And if your goal is to, just to do a job, you should ask around, do your research and see, is this something I really need? For example, I know when I was working as a reporter, um, people would go to, get a master's in journalism, which is great, but you don't need a master's in journalism if you want to be a reporter. It can be helpful, but
Yeah.
it might not be worth that trade-off if that's in your calculus.
Right.
Um, for me, I think on the topic of mentorship, obviously one of the obvious ones was my media law professor because she, was a lawyer, was a journalist, made that transition, decided she didn't want it. So that made sense. But you can also find mentors in, professors, friends, other people at Maryland that might not appear at first glance. So one of my professors, who I'm actually seeing in New York, uh, in 2 days was my broadcast news director. So she ran the TV station on at Maryland. And I remember, I kept in touch with her over the years. Every time I was making a move for a job or some type of journalism decision, we'd always chat. And when I was going to tell her that I was leaving and also needed a recommendation letter, I was a little nervous because, it's kind of like telling someone, yeah, all the things that you did for me, I'm kind of doing something else now.
Right.
But she ended up being so incredibly supportive. And, she'd been doing it for, I don't know how many years, decades. And she's told me, you're not the first one to make this change. You're not going to be the last one. And, here's how other things have played out in the past, and really gave me a different perspective that I wouldn't have gotten if I just asked people who had gone to law school and walked that path. And also just another thing too is the I guess older I get or the further removed I get from my time at Maryland, especially in the honors college, you realize how many cool and smart and accomplished people there are that happen to be your friends. And so when I was looking at UVA, I went on. It was funny. We got you get like an admissions welcome packet, and there's, it's very well done. They're like pictures and of people who've won awards and all that. And there was a picture in there of one of my friends who lived in Hagerstown with me.
Oh,
And I was like, I had no idea he went to went to UVA for law school. So again, just kind of out of the blue, I had his number saved from back when we were freshmen, texted it, was like, "Hey Ben, I don't know if this is still your number. I hope it is. Random question. You went to UVA, right?" And so I was able to, have a talk with him about his experience and to understand, why he thought UVA was special for him and whether or not it'd be a good fit for me. And so, really don't discount just the people you hang out with.
yeah,
I think we played basketball and watched football together, and that was kind of the extent of our, friendship, and that ended up becoming, part of this network I now have.
yeah,
So to use that word.
yeah. Well, it's a healthy kind of diffusing of that word from some of the connotations it has. I mean, these things happen organically, right? Kori, how about your decision process to find your way to Cornell, to find your way into an MBA? Was that, I mean, that's a far cry from journalism and Arabic. So when did you realize that an MBA was something that you felt like you needed, and what led you to that conclusion?
Yes. So I always knew, I mean, I kind of had the sense that I wanted to go back to school, but I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do because I had interest in a lot of things. I wanted to stay in business, but I also was interested in like education and nonprofits and all those types of things. And so I was thinking about my career. I realized I did not want to be an accountant anymore. I was like, this was great, but yeah, I think there's greener pastures for me. And so that's when I really started thinking about what degree would make the most sense. And so I heard about from mentors that, consulting should be something that you think about. And consulting is like a big, vague term, right? You can do all types of consulting, management consulting, strategy consulting, financial consulting. But I realized, after doing some research and talking to a few folks and I guess like Dennis networking a bit at different events, I was like, okay, I want to get into like management strategy consultant, like helping, big corporations think through their next big decision, whether it's around products or strategy development or expanding into a new area. So it's like, okay, how do I get into this? I started finding the kind of firms that do that type of work, McKinsey being one of them. And I'm shooting my shot, applying, not getting any traction with any of them. Everybody's like, you're an accountant, like you're sticking your lane, right?
Right.
And so that's when my mentors were like, okay, like you've been thinking about wanting to go back to school, like MBA I think would be good to help you kind of reposition and not just an MBA like part-time. And there's nothing wrong with doing a part-time or like an online program, but they're like, hey, you really need to think about going full-time, isolating yourself, being focused on just recruiting and really developing those people skills. And so that's what pushed me to pursue like a full-time MBA program. My family thought I was crazy. They're like, hey, you have a good career as an accountant. Why would you give that up to be broke for
Yeah.
2 years? That's a huge opportunity cost. You don't even know if you're going to get the job that you wanted. But I was like, okay, if I want to work at McKinsey, they took, I kind of missed the boat from undergrad. I gotta try for the MBA route. So that was how I ended up doing that. And, I've really enjoyed my time here at the firm because, like I said, I knew I had a lot of different interests and I've been able to do a random walk, but now focus a lot of my work in a combination of like private equity, but also education and sometimes ed tech, looking at like how we can acquire, helping clients acquire portfolio companies and emerging new companies in the education space to make
Yeah.
education more accessible. So I got to combine my interest in that way through, being able to take the MBA and making the pivot out of accounting to go
Yeah.
down that route. In terms of mentorship, as I mentioned, it's a big role of who I have been because I didn't have people at home who could give me guidance on what to do.
Yeah.
And I think the mentors, some of it has happened. Well, most of my mentors have happened organically. And I think, as folks have mentioned, it's not always, a mentor is not always someone who's like super senior to you. They can be folks like in your class or classmates or, folks a few years above you who just really, give you guidance and help you figure things out. So I'm a firm believer of this concept of having like a board of directors. So,
Mm.
folks from different paths and times in my life who can give different perspectives on what I need. And not only do I have mentors there who, like I said, give advice, but also have sponsors who have created opportunities for me, whether it was like, I knew I wanted to push myself in a certain role, and they're like, okay, I found this project for you to be able to develop this new skill, or, advocating for me to get a promotion, when I was at Freddie Mac. And being really intentional about maintaining those relationships with those mentorships and those sponsors, because I think a lot of times people have these relationships and they only expect people to do for them. Like, help me,
Right.
write a recommendation letter, help me get this job, whatever it is. And as I've grown older, I realized it's a lot of also pouring into those people as well. So if
Yeah.
it's like they're having, say, an event like this at their job and they're like, oh, we need speakers. I'm like, okay, I'll sign up and do
Yeah.
it. Or, if they want me to go talk to a mentee of theirs about what I'm doing in my career path, I'll lean in that way or whatever it is. So it's mutually beneficial. And I found that to be the most useful in my career. I'm even now thinking about, making another leap and, going for another promotion. And I really lean on these folks to just help give me perspective and tease out my options. So
Yeah.
big fan of mentorship and sponsorship. And, in terms of just closing grad school, just be really thoughtful about it, because you don't want to take on debt just for the sake of taking on debt. I feel like sometimes people just do that, but be really intentional and strategic, and use those mentors and sponsors to help you tease that out to figure the best path.
It is a complicated calculus, isn't it? I mean, it's not just about professional ambitions. It is about geography. I mean, do you
Hmm.
want to live in Charlottesville? Do you want to live in New York? Do you want to live in upstate New York?
Yeah.
It's money, it's all of those things. And so it's a complicated nest of considerations to weigh. So we're amassing some questions in the chat, which is great. So let me turn to the next one, which shifts us a little bit in our focus. So the question is whether you have tips when it comes to managing feelings of imposter syndrome in school or in a new workplace. And maybe since we have a psychologist with us, I'll start with Kiara on that question. So, imposter syndrome in school or in a workplace. Suggestions for how to manage that?
Yeah, I I am still figuring it out. I think that's kind of the first thing to name, that I validate that it is a very and not in a way that minimizes a person's experience, but I think it's important to remember that something is happening that is causing us to all doubt ourselves, or cause certain folks, or from folks from certain communities, to doubt themselves more than others. And I think that for me, I think it's getting really clear. I feel like I keep saying this in different talks that I do or whatever, but like really leaning on your strengths. And I feel like for me, one of the things that I think I felt a lot of imposter syndrome with in grad school is I'd always been a very strong writer. I remember on my SAT, even on my GRE, I scored in the like 98th percentile in writing and reading. And I've always been a reader, but I scored literally like in the 6th percentile in math. Like it was really bad. Like, and so I remember even coming to UMD and getting into the honors college and telling myself, oh, this, like, I remember actually thinking that I was like the diversity quota, which is not to say that that's what Maryland did or does, but I like, you can just think about how all those messages, right, that people of color, that women of color get like placed onto them.
Yeah.
Like, I remember feeling that a lot through college. And then I think it was honestly just like getting much more like what in my field we call like critical consciousness, like just building more awareness of like these systems and structures that cause us to feel so
Hmm.
um much like an imposter. And so for me, that has just meant like having that knowledge, feeling confident in that, and then just like really paying attention to my strengths.
Yeah.
The example that I was going to say earlier with my GRE or SAT is like, even though I would score, 98th percentile in math, or I'm sorry, 98th percentile in reading and writing, and I always did very well on my essay type of assignments, I always paid so much more attention to the fact that I was 6th percentile in math, or the fact that it took me 5 hours to do a stats homework that should have taken me an hour. And
Yeah.
so what I do, and what I also help my clients do, is figure out like, why are you paying so much attention to the negatives? Like what is so attractive to like that story that you tell yourself about yourself? And what is the story that you're telling yourself that is not being heard, right? That you're not listening to? Like, how do you tap into those strengths?
Yeah.
And I think that's what I had to do. I had to like, and I think it was teaching, honestly, that taught me that,
Hmm.
like feeling like, I don't know, I've built very good relationships with my students, and I'm like the cool professor, they tell me. And so, I think I've just had to get experience and just like learn that I can make mistakes, I can, mess up, and it doesn't take away from my accomplishments. It doesn't take away from, my intelligence. It means I'm human. But I think you kind of have to like live and learn. Because I'm still, I am not gone of imposter syndrome by any doubt, but I certainly am not the same way I was when I was 22 and just starting.
Yeah. No, I think it's a helpful reminder that um, that this is not a phenomenon that stops when you get a
Mhm.
job or when even you've been in a job for a long time. It can be a long journey, right? And it probably ebbs and flows and in various ways during the course of that. Dennis,
Yeah, and I think that.
oh,
Oh,
sorry.
sorry.
No, please, no,
No,
go
no,
ahead, Kiara, please.
no. I was just gonna say like I don't know what years everyone is, but I think that's like the most insidious part of it is that like you keep telling yourself like, oh, once I get my master's, I'll believe in myself. Once I get
Yeah,
my, JD, my MBA, my PhD, right? And like that was me. Like I literally remember telling myself, oh, once I get my PhD, then I'll believe in myself.
yeah,
It's 2 years. I
right.
still, right. And obviously I've gotten a lot better. And so I think it's just about starting early, not expecting yourself to just wake up and, you don't want to be a narcissist either, right? There's like a nice balance that we want to strike
Right.
between like total just fear and imposter syndrome and narcissism. And I think that just takes time. So
Yeah. Good. So Dennis, let me ask you. So law school, I think especially can be, um, a kind of hyper competitive environment, and I can imagine that these feelings, rearing their head in that context. Did you encounter it in that, at that time in life? Did you encounter it earlier? What suggestions might you have for our current students in facing down this demon?
Yeah. So I actually just saw this like a few days ago, but there's like a newspaper clipping from some baseball player decades ago, and it's like I believe in dinosaurs, which means dinosaurs had to believe in me, and if dinosaurs believe in me, then I can believe in myself. Which I just think is hilarious, but maybe not very helpful. No, I think you're definitely right. Like when you go to law school, it's a bunch of people who are all really driven. They like to argue. They there's definitely like competition. And for me coming in, I was one of the older students. A lot of the students came, straight through. They a lot of students they had parents who were lawyers, family who were lawyers. Maybe a lot of them worked in, law firms as paralegals. And I'm like, well, I like told stories and wore makeup and like talked on TV. And I don't know how that's like really translatable. And so I remember going in my first semester, and in law school, at least at UVA, you're graded on a curve. So, I will say like Virginia law was very, the word they like to use a lot is collegial. It felt a lot like Maryland in that sense, where you have the competition isn't as blatant and everyone really does support each other, but you still know you're competing. And I remember going in that first semester with the mindset of let me just ride the curve. Let me just do like, be median because that's probably like what I'm gonna do. And I was like pleasantly surprised after the first semester. And
Yeah.
so I think, going in and realizing that you're not alone in this. I talked to my friends who were paralegals. One of my friends' grandfather was a former Supreme Court justice, and we like everyone feels the same thing because even if you come from a family of lawyers, you're still going to wonder, well, what if I'm like the one that's not cut out for it.
Right.
For someone like me, where you have no legal background, you're wondering, well, like no one in my family's done it. Maybe we're not cut out for it. And so having that recognition that everyone's in it together kind of helps. But
Right.
also the other thing too is you really want to find out what your strengths are. And I think Kiara mentioned this, but you are good at something. Everyone here is good at something. And I think when you realize what your strengths are, you can realize how that fits in to what you're trying to do. So, because I had been a reporter for so long, I knew I had experienced public speaking. And, I don't know if I'm good at it, but I know that I don't get scared to do it because I've done it so much. And I think knowing that was one of my strengths really helped me find ways that I could, um, you know, convince myself that I can do this. Even though what I was doing before was very different to what I was doing in law school, there was enough of a translation of skills that I figured, okay, yes, I have to learn how to read cases. I have to learn legalese. I never took Latin ever in my life. I have to learn, a little bit of Latin now. But because I had something I was good at, I could use that to build on and really convince myself, because with imposter syndrome, that's who you're convincing, that that I could do this. And yeah, it's going to take work, but
Yeah.
everyone's got a strength, and find your strength and really focus on that as well.
That's I and there's that theme emerging. I appreciate that. Kori, I'm wondering, you mentioned like Kiara being first generation. It strikes me that that when this syndrome asserts itself, it might assert itself particularly for folks who are new to some of these spaces. Is that something that you contended with, or not? And do you have thoughts about how our students should face it?
So I second what everybody has said already so far, so I don't want to beat a dead horse. It's something that I still deal with today. I feel like earlier in my career was something that kind of engulfed me and would paralyze me from, being able to make decisions and things of that nature. And now it's like, okay, I'm able to be aware of it. And because I'm aware of it, it's like, okay, let
Yeah,
me be more conscientious of keeping it in check or doing like rituals before I go to a meeting or something so I can feel like prepped and like
yeah.
excited and like, oh, I got this. Like I talk to myself in the mirror
I
sometimes.
was
I
going to
put sticky
ask.
notes
Yeah.
on my mirror,
Yeah.
on my mirror just to remind me that I'm like I'm that girl as we
Yeah.
say. And I don't need to. Yeah, sometimes it gets hard, but I think another point that I want to touch on is like now, and it's something I wish I would have took advantage of at Maryland, but now I go to a therapist who
Yeah.
helps me to actually deal with these emotions
Yeah.
because sometimes I'm like, okay, am I, being gaslit? Am I going crazy? Like, what's going on? And my therapist actually is like a huge help of helping me to contextualize things and then actually take actions. And, like I said, being conscientious of
Yeah.
when I feel those emotions to like not let it consume me. And so, like I said, like at the, now, I mean, at Maryland, there's resources for you to do that. And at the time, I remember, I'm like, I'm not going to see no therapist. I'm not, that's for crazy people.
Yeah.
Now I'm like, my therapist is my best friend, and I talk to her twice a week
Yeah.
and and we talk about all these things that keep me accountable. And I think it also helps having a friend group where now like I'm in this competitive career and just being able to be vulnerable to talk about those feelings because sometimes it did feel like okay, I'm the only one in this room, from a certain ethnic background, from a socioeconomic background, etc. Like, do I fit in? But I've through therapy, I've been able to shift that perspective of being like, okay, this is not a disadvantage, but this is an advantage. This is a unique perspective that I bring. And I'm seeing that now a lot of times in the rooms that I'm in, where sometimes people do have very similar backgrounds. They all, vacation in Martha's Vineyard together and they all went to Yale for undergrad together. And I'm like, well, no, I didn't do that. But hey, since we're talking about making education more equitable, I can talk about it because I went to Baltimore City Public Schools and I
Yeah.
actually lived through that, right? So leaning into that as an advantage instead of letting it like control and consume me of me being an oddball out has
Yeah.
really helped. Like I said, I still deal with it, but
Yeah.
now, like I said, I'm more aware of it and I don't let it consume me as much. I find like fitness and other things that help me get some of that energy out.
No, that's great, and I really appreciate how reflective all three of you are in naming this phenomenon and being very intentional about how you contend with it, because it strikes me that that probably is half the battle, right? I mean, when you're just buffeted by it and kind of not not sort of countenancing it for what it is, it's got to be impossible to stare down. Um, I'm gonna try to sort of move things along because the questions really are sort of piling in, and so I want to make sure that as many of these as we can answer that we haven't already touched on, we can. So Let me throw out a few and invite one of you to answer each of these. So there's a question here about how you think your time in honors opened doors for you or helped you in your journey of figuring out who you are and your career path. So, was there something in honors specifically? We've talked about Maryland, we've talked about Hagerstown. Was there something in UH specifically that you felt like you look back on and you're like this really sort of propelled me in this in a particular direction? Does one of you want to tackle that? Or not. We can move on to the next.
Yeah, I think for me, the two things I can think of were just like the people you meet, your friends, your professors, the mentors that you had from the program. I think that's kind of what I took away the most from my time. And when I think back on my time there, that's kind of the what I remember. And I think one of the great things about it is you have people who are studying different things, who come from different backgrounds, different, walks of life, and who are going to be doing different things. And on like a personal level, that's really cool because there's so many cool people in the program. And on a professional level, you never know when that person's going to be someone you work with, or become, they're one of your clients, or you interview them for a story, or whatever. So I think that was for me the biggest thing.
I have to say that's a theme that I hear from alumni over the years about UH specifically because there isn't a single kind of disciplinary orientation to the program, unlike some of our peer programs. They comment on the fact that they move into a career where they're surrounded most days by people who, in one way or another, are engaged in the same thing that they're engaged in. And so there's a kind of nostalgia for being around folks from kind of all walks of intellectual life, all walks of kind of professional ambition. That's certainly something I hear fairly often. Let me ask, there's another question here. What is one thing you would do differently if you could go back in time to your college days? So, without getting too personal, is there a regret or a wish that, if I'd maybe not wasted so much time in this or did a little bit more of that, or what's something you would change if you could go back?
I
Oh, sorry.
let
Go
me.
ahead, Corey.
I'll just say really quick. I have two things. One, I wish I would have done like a semester abroad. Um, I did like a winter one, and I loved it so much, but that was like my junior year, and at the point it was too late. So I wish I would have done that and just really pushed myself out of my comfort zone a bit more, to really build new skills in that way. Because there's a lot of scholarships and stuff you can get for it too. I was worried about money, and then turns out there was money available. So don't let that be a burden. And two, I was a bit more reserved in undergrad, and
Hmm.
I wish I would have just put myself out there a bit more. Like I said, I let imposter syndrome get in my head a lot,
Yeah.
and being in certain spaces and feeling I wouldn't fit in and things of that nature. So, I wish I would have sacrificed a little more sleep
Hmm.
and just tried new clubs and new adventures that I just normally wouldn't have because college is that time where you really can truly explore and learn new things and make friends across like different backgrounds. So I guess those are my two regrets that I would
Get
do
out there.
differently.
Yeah. Kiara, what were you going to say?
I was gonna say, uh, the first thing that came to mind is I would drink less. I feel like because I was not a drinker in high school at all, and so when I started college, and again, it kind of goes back to also just like the friends that I made in university honors and how much they cared about me and how much I cared about them, and so they really looked out for me, and I think they were actually the ones like I And so the reason I say I would drink less is because I think during college, obviously I wasn't in mental health. I hadn't really been aware of my like emotions. I hadn't realized how much I was using substances to just numb,
Mm.
and to just like not feel. And like I it's funny because now I consider myself a very anxious person. Like I am anxious. I know I am.
Mm.
I would never have used that word to describe myself in college, but I think that's just because I like was suppressing it, whether it be through like, whatever thing that was helping me like deny whatever I was feeling.
Right.
Yeah, and so I guess I would just like I wish I didn't do that as much. I wish I like went to therapy, like, what Kori was saying earlier. And like, and it helps now that I'm a psychologist and hindsight is 2020. But like I definitely think I guess I was maybe just a little bit more kinder to myself back then.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I was just complimenting all of you on how reflective you all
Mhm.
are about the challenges that you've faced and the decisions that you've made. And so it's interesting to hear about something that sort of impeded that kind of self-reflection. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so I've got a question here about this is back to mentorship, and I think it came in when we were talking about mentors, and someone wonders about how you maintain those relationships that have clearly been so impactful for all of you, even as, I'm thinking about Dennis's story, but I think it's true in various ways for all three of you as you make significant professional pivots. If you're moving away from one field into another, or even if you're moving from one business to another, or you're moving from one city to another. I mean, Kiara, you were in the DMV, and then you were in Boston, and now you're in New York, and I can just imagine that alone becomes a challenge to maintaining those relationships that have been so impactful. So let me just invite all of you to kind of reflect on what strategies you have or what you've found has worked in keeping up relationships, even if they grew up organically, even if you don't think about them as kind of that transactional network that we talked about briefly earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll I think adult friendships are hard. Like I think college was the best time ever for friends.
Yeah.
Like I still look back so fondly on all of my years dorming. Like it was just I loved having my friends around.
Hmm.
Um and I think with being an adult and everyone, especially once people start having families, like that is like a whole other level of and I think the thing that I've had to realize is that I'm not going to be able to keep in touch with everyone all the time. And so for me, what I've had to realize and what's been helpful is it does take effort. Like it's not easy the way it was in college, right? Like in college, it was kind of like, oh, let's like walk over to the gym together. Let's walk over to class or let's sit together in class. But like now it's like, no, you actually have to give up Friday night in bed watching Netflix with Ben and Jerry's and actually like put on clothes and see a friend. And like it takes effort and it's hard, but like you have to like we have to do it. And even if and I think that's the thing. Sometimes we have to put in the effort even if we don't feel like it. um so yeah, that would be my big thing is just like put in the effort and like let people know that you care. Because I think a lot of times that prevents people from maintaining those connections.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kori or Dennis, we're coming toward the end of our time, but please, this feels like an apt question to end on how we maintain these relationships.
Yeah. I think this may be just a little like more practical. I send Christmas cards. I love sending Christmas cards every year. I have like a list. It's like probably 150, 200 people. I also put on like Instagram, like if anyone wants a Christmas card, send me your address. And um, it's actually incredible how many people I've reconnected through that because I'll usually handwrite, notes on the back of every single card. And, even if it's someone I haven't talked to in, like 5, 6, 7 years, like who doesn't love a Christmas card? And, I always have like, it's always like kind of funny, I think. And so, you're gonna hang them up on your fridge, and something just small like that, you know, you're not going to have time to go have in-depth conversations with everyone all the time, but just reminding people that you are thinking about them, I think that goes a very long way.
That's great. And I see Kori has already indicated that she wants added to that list. And so
Yes, very
Open
much
list.
so. I will say quickly what I would add on to that is that, especially as I move jobs and I've kept up with mentors, I try to be really intentional of, I have like an Excel list of folks that were really key in my careers, and
Mm.
I'll like make a reminder like, okay, once, twice a year, let me just send them a note and just say, hey, how are you? Saw this article, thought of you, would love to chat about it if you have 15 minutes.
hmm,
And sometimes they take me up on the 15 minutes. Sometimes it's like, don't have time, but thanks for sharing. Or I'll share like a big update or promotion
hmm,
that I have and ask them how their kids are doing, because people love talking about their kids and all, that kind of stuff. So, that way it's not always that I'm seeing them in person. Like sometimes I do get to link up with them in person and have a quick lunch, but as people spread out, it's hard to do that. But I think now in this day of age where you have all this technology like FaceTime and Zoom, it's so much easier to just be able to, grab time to do that. Granted, you do have to be intentional, like Kiara said, because life just hits you hard, and next thing you know, it's been a year, and you're like, man, I haven't reached out to that person.
yep.
But now I even use tools like on my iPhone where I'll schedule send. Like if I think of somebody, I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna need to hit them up in a couple. I'll just schedule this to go out in a few weeks. To just be like,
You
I'm
are a
thinking of you.
management consultant, aren't you,
Yeah, I
Kori? I can
know.
I can hear that McKinsey coming through.
But I mean, it's been really helpful. Like I said, is just so when I do need something, it doesn't always feel transactional. It's like,
Mhm.
hey, I've been talking to you, I've been keeping in touch with you, I even offered to do something for you. And
Yeah.
that now it feels more natural. And as I build new mentors, learning to build that credibility with them and vice versa. I'm even doing side of desk stuff at my job, which I really don't even want to do sometimes. But it's like that investment of being like, okay, I'm scratching your back. Now you can scratch mine. So carving out time for that so it doesn't take over my life, but I like Dennis's idea of Christmas cards. A lot of the partners I do that, and it actually works pretty well. So I might do that too.
Let me know if you need ideas.
Well, that's why we're here. That's why we've been here tonight, is to share all of these ideas. And I'm looking at the count. Some 140 students have joined us for this conversation, and I do want to thank you all for giving back in this way. This is another relationship in your life. I mean, it's a
Mhm.
relationship to this program. It's a relationship indirectly to some of these students. I suspect that a
Mhm.
number of the students, if they haven't already, will begin trying to connect with you on LinkedIn. They may have specific questions for you, and I certainly would be grateful on their behalf if you'd be willing to connect with them. Um, and I will encourage everybody as I do at the end of these to connect with us on LinkedIn. I mean, this is, as I say, a community of folks associated with this. We don't we as Kiara was saying, college is this extraordinary few years. You all have recalled the experiences that you had that made such a difference, and maintaining that connection, I think, can be really impactful. And it's in that spirit that we organize these events. So, um, um, that is, I think, a wrap. It's unfortunate that we're on a webinar and so that you can't hear the round of applause. But I'm seeing comments already coming in, thanking you all. So thank you all for spending some time with us, for sharing some wisdom. And yeah, don't be a stranger, okay?
Thank you
Bye.
all.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Have a great night. Bye-bye.
Bye.